Marty, how do you spell your last name?
Zimmerman, Zimmerman.
Yeah, explain what 360 is.
The 360 is a
Evaluation.
feedback that's around the circular 360 where the leader in the center receives feedback from a combination of their leader in the org chart above them, their peers, their clients laterally on that circle, and then their employees, figuratively speaking, the hierarchy underneath them. And hence that term 360, that well-rounded perspective.
What kind of questions do they ask?
They ask questions such as, this leader makes honesty a high priority in all circumstances. This leader speaks with emotional perspective and maturity. This leader makes productive debate, this leader facilitates productive debate and discussion. This leader creates problem solving that results in increased business and solutions, and so forth. It's across what we call motivation, visionary, risk-taking, decisiveness, team orientation. And when you approach these leaders with their feedback, they don't know who you are, and you can have me stop anytime you want, Barry, but for 3 hours of their time, and most of them don't want to see me, and by the time we're finished, they don't want me to leave. Mm-hmm. In other words, it's transformational conversations that I experienced every time with these leaders, as they became comfortable with sharing their stories and seeing the gap between what they perceived in terms of what they were thinking and what others around them saw as a result of what they said and did.
Wow.
And it was all about closing that gap between perception of their perception and perception of others.
Have you ever done this in the public school system?
No, have not done it. That's about the one industry. I've done it across the transportation industry, retail, energy.
Give me a typical example of a gap, what the gap looks like.
Well, a gap, an example might be this. The leader thinks they're always drawing out people's truths, always inviting people to speak and to speak freely. And what they find is people don't want to speak with them. They don't want to tell them what's going on. And one of the differences they'll figure out is I'll ask them a question like this, and I learned this from the role models who do it all the time, is are you always asking questions that start with a what and a how or with a why? And what they find, what I always hear, is they will typically say, I'm always asking a why question. And the difference between a why and a what is one that either brings out defensiveness and avoiding the real truth, or a what question promotes objectivity. And one leader, the way they put it as an example is someone says to you, this situation's hopeless, Barry, and you say, why is that? And I say, because they're jerks, that's why. A why brings out that emotional response. But instead, when I say, this situation's hopeless, Barry, and you say, well, what makes you say that, Marty? There's more of a tendency for me to respond with what I've observed, with the evidence, as opposed to, and I said to one leader, I says, well, with my luck, they'd still say they're jerks, Marty, that's what. And he said, you know what, Marty, you just keep at it with the what. It's not like just one magic bullet, but you keep at it.
That's interesting. And you say it was transformational. How so?
Transformational in the sense that, examples. I had one person, and he was in Montreal, and he was from the French-Canadian side. And when I came to visit, I was told ahead of time, he doesn't like you. He thinks you're some American cowboy coming up to tell him what leadership's all about. He also had a very tough report. He had a lot of issues. And at one point, I just know, Barry, that in all these conversations, it'll turn. And obviously, he wasn't playing with me when we started. But there was one behavior statement, the one that says this person speaks with emotional perspective and maturity. All his employees were marking him less than 50% of the time. What do you think causes your employees to see you as less than half of the time in frequency? I yell at people. And I said to him, and Barry, that's because you care. And let's say that he was Barry. And Barry suddenly looked at me in the eyes for the first time and said, Marty, you know me well. Can we take a break? We took a break. We walked into a cafeteria that was a part of a manufacturing plant. All his buddies he grew up with. I could instantly tell as they were looking at his body language that I was okay. And we then had a little bit of lunch with him. We came back, and we had the most productive conversation. He was then willing to open up and share and to learn. And I also learn mutually with them. The way I start every conversation is, see me not as your judge or psychologist, see me as your tour guide. I'll take you on a tour of your data, and I'll ask you questions like, what about this? And have you thought about that? And you're the judge. It's your data, your stories and experiences. And as you mentioned in your classes, the power of the story, the power of sharing analogies, the power of the right kinds of questions always draw out people's life stories.